All right, so today we're going to be doing Daniel chapter 6. It's Daniel in Lion's Den. Before we get into that, I'm going to read a little bit from Daniel chapter 5 near the end of it. So you can kind of see what the story was before that. Okay, so in Daniel chapter 5, at the end of Daniel chapter 5, God's hand appears, writes these words on the wall. Many tekel parson. Daniel says, this is the interpretation of the matter. Mene, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balance and found wanting. Peres, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Then Belshazzar gave the command, and Daniel was clothed with purple, and a chain of gold was put around his neck. Then a proclamation was made about him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. That very night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was killed. And Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. So this is where we pick up the story. Daniel, golden robe, nothing bad can happen to this kid anymore. Nothing, just good things are going to happen to this guy now that he's been honored by the king. Daniel chapter 6. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was one, to whom the satraps would be given account, so the king might suffer no loss. Then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other presidents and satraps because of an excellent spirit was in him. The king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Then the presidents and the satraps sought to found a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom, but they could find no ground for complaint or fault because he was faithful. No error was found in him. These men said, we shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God. All right. I don't know if you pick up the connection here, but you might connect this a little bit to Joseph. You remember Joseph is brought into the land of Egypt. He's sold as a slave into the land of Egypt, and he serves Pharaoh. Now, depending on what kind of fictional story you have, a lot of times when your hero is sold into, or when he is tricked to work for the king or for whoever, they work to undermine the king. They're secretly plotting to have a rebellion. In the case of Joseph, on the other hand, Joseph works faithfully. Even though he's sold as a slave, he ends up working faithfully for his master. Then he ends up working faithfully for the king who releases him out of prison later on. Daniel's a kind of similar thing. God gives Daniel a lot of wisdom. God gives him the ability to interpret dreams and interpret miracles and signs and stuff. But he also gives him practical wisdom. And Daniel serves honorably. And this is actually a pretty consistent theme throughout Christianity. Even if you go to Romans 13, where it talks about us serving our governments, it's even if you've got a bad government, even if you have a Caesar, for example, or if you have, a Balthasar or a Darius or something like that, even if you've got a pagan ruler, as a Christian, you still have an obligation to be a hard worker. You still have an obligation. This is one of these things that it's hard to kind of explain and understand, but even in the case of slavery, in the case of unjust slavery, we can agree that Joseph was sold into slavery unjust. So the slavery that he was in, the Bible is not saying that the slavery is a good thing, especially that the slavery that Joseph was sold into was a good thing. But even though he was a slave, Joseph was an honorable man. Even though he was in a pagan kingdom, Daniel acted honorably. So regardless of the sin of other people that put you in circumstances, you still are able to act out as a Christian. Whether it's in prison or whether it's in slavery, the faithfulness of God's faithful people stands out. It makes a difference. You are able to be joyful in prison. Another example, Paul and Silas singing hymns and stuff in prison when they were in prison. So let's get back to Daniel here. Daniel's put in charge of all of these satraps. He's put in charge, just similar to Joseph. He's put in charge, third in command in the entire kingdom. Oh, a Persian term for a provincial official. Okay, so it's not like think about it like mayors or governors. Something like that. So it's somebody who's in charge of a province. So like a governor, somebody who's in charge of a large area. All right. So Daniel's put in charge of these people. He's the best one out of all of them. The satraps are conspiring against him. or actually not the satraps, the presidents and the satraps are all conspiring against this foreigner who's come in and caught the eye of the king. Daniel is honored and honorable, and they want to trap him somehow, but unfortunately, he just behaves himself so much. So verse 6 will continue. We're in Daniel chapter 6 this morning, Daniel chapter 6, verse 6. Then these presidents and satraps came by agreement to the king and said, "O King Darius, live forever." All the presidents of the kingdom and the prefects and the satraps and the counselors and the governors all agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction that whoever makes petition to any god, god or man for 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the document and injunction. All right, so they're setting up this trap. You can't pray to anybody except for King Darius. And Darius doesn't see the problem in that because he's the king. This is a pretty common custom in a lot of ancient traditions. Whether it's a Caesar or whether it's a pharaoh, a lot of times the leader of the country would regard themselves as the king of kings, the god of gods, the lord of lords. So the pharaoh, you would have all the different gods in Egypt, but the highest god of all would be Pharaoh. You would have the various gods in Greek or Roman or whatever, but Caesar himself would be the god in charge of the people. So in this case, it's not particularly weird that Darius wants people to pray to him and regard him as God. That's pretty standard. He signs a petition in particular, so he puts himself in a legal bind here. Now, the word of the king is only worth something if the king can be trusted. So he puts himself in a situation where he has to sign this particular kind of petition that he can't change. So this is like an official declaration. This is like a constitutional amendment, and everybody, it goes through all the processes and it gets approved. Well, the president can't just say, well, I'm going to change my mind on that. I'm not going to abide by the president or by the Constitution. It's like, no, you signed this thing. You can't go back on it. All right, so verse 10. When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house, where he had windows in his upper chamber open towards Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before God as he had done previously. So I love that he doesn't even flinch. He's like, okay, so I'm not allowed, whatever, I'm going to go do what I was already doing. He didn't even try to hide it. Verse 11. Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and plea before God. Then they came near and said before the king concerning the injunction, "O king, did you not sign an injunction that anyone who makes petition to any god or man within 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions?" The king, I love that they explain the entire thing to him. The king answered and said, "This thing stands fast according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked." Then they answered before the king, "Daniel, who is one of your exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or the injunction you have signed, but makes petition 3 times a day." So just a little note on the language real quick. You'll see a lot of times in the book of Daniel, you'll have phrases repeated. Daniel, I'm not going to say it's a poetic book, but there's cadences in it, like the fiery furnace, the fiery furnace. There are things that they'll say almost as if it's a brand name, like you have to say the entire name. And in this case, you've got the injunction, what is in the injunction, and the statement that it cannot be revoked. Because I really want you to pay attention to say, keep in mind, he cannot change this law, and this is what this law does. You remember that law? Imagine you're teaching this story to your children. It's like the Bible wants you to teach your children these things. It's like, all right, now remember, he can't pray to anybody, and Darius can't change the law. So then he prays. Now they go to Darius and said, here's the law. Remember, you can't pray to anybody, and Darius can't change the law. So they repeat this a few times. All right, verse 14, Daniel chapter 6, verse 14. Then the king, when he heard these words, was much distressed and set his mind to deliver Daniel. And he labored till the sun went down to rescue him. And these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, "Know, O king, that it is a law of the Medes and the Persians, and no injunction or ordinance that the king established can be changed." Again, this repetition, this is, and he had big teeth, and he was scary, and it was, you're building up this monster that, how can he overcome this? Verse 16, then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. The king declared to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve, continually deliver you." And a stone was Interesting. And a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet, and with the signet of the Lord's, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. So Darius actually kind of likes Daniel at this point. And he's pretty upset that he has to put Daniel to death. And if you want to make a connection between throwing somebody into a cave and rolling a stone over and sealing it, between that and the Easter story, you can absolutely do that, especially if you see how the story ends. Verse 19. Then, at the break of day, the king arose and went in haste to the den of lions. And they came near to the den where Daniel was, and he cried out with a tone of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, "O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" Then Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever. My God has sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him and before you, O king. I have done no harm. Then the king was exceedingly glad and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken out of the den. No kind of harm was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. The king commanded, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and cast into the den of lions, they and their children and their wives. And before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces. That's such a, I mean, again, if you're telling this story to the kids, like, yeah, they got their comeuppance. The cartoon version that I've got, that I read my kids, they're familiar with the story of Daniel and the lions, but they don't get the end part. And all their bones are broken to pieces. Yeah. Verse 25, then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell on the earth, "Peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that all my royal dominion people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions." So this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Okay, so then Daniel goes back to doing visions and stuff like that. It's a great story. There's some connections that you can absolutely make there to Jesus and coming out of the tomb and stuff like that. In fact, what I would actually like to do is, because we have time, I actually want to do Daniel. I want to do the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I want to do the fiery furnace, because it's very similar in a lot of respects. It's the same. I mean, it's a different king. It's Nebuchadnezzar, so it's going to be earlier. It's almost the same sort of trap. It's in Daniel chapter 3, if you want to turn to that. Daniel chapter 3. Now, this is a great story to tell you about God protecting, but this does not necessarily mean that no harm will ever come to any Christian who asks for it. Sometimes God does allow John the Baptist to die, for example. John the Baptist was in prison and he died. Peter was in prison and God brought him out of prison. So sometimes God allows the saints to be brought directly to heaven, and sometimes he's still working on them and doing stuff with them, so he keeps them on the earth. The reason Daniel is protected is, I'm sure that there's some sort of probably the higher critics would look at the story and say that it was all a fabricated fiction. If they didn't, they would say, well, Daniel had some sort of trick. He was an animal handler or something like that, and he was able to control the lions. And no, it just doesn't wash. It's very clear that the lions should have killed Daniel, and they didn't. So that which should have kept Daniel in the grave was not even able to touch him or hold him. So if you're thinking about this in the Easter narrative, that which should have kept Jesus in the grave, which holds everybody else in the grave, death itself, was not able to even touch Jesus. Jesus walks right out. So Jesus walks right out after an Easter morning. All right, Daniel chapter 3. Daniel chapter 3. All right. In Daniel chapter 2, the end of Daniel chapter 2, I'm going to read verse 46 and following. Daniel is once again interpreting things, so you can see this pattern happening again. Different king. This is not Darius, this is King Nebuchadnezzar. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and paid homage to Daniel commanded an offering and an incense be offered up to him. The king answered, also said to Daniel, truly your God, truly your God is God of gods, Lord of lords, and Lord of kings, a revealer of mysteries, for you've been able to reveal this mystery. Then the king gave Daniel high honors and many great gifts and made him a ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and his chief prefect over all the wise men in Babylon. Daniel made a request of the king as he approached, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel remained in the king's court. Okay, so once again, at the end of the story, Daniel is promoted and regarded, and so are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Chapter 3. So you would think with all this language that a lot of these kings say, like Darius and Nebuchadnezzar, and they basically are talking like faithful Christians and stuff, right? They're talking about he is King of Kings, Lord of Lords. Not so much. Remember, they've got a pantheon of gods, and to them, the God of the Bible is just one of those. He just happens to be the most powerful at this moment. So Daniel chapter 3. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its breadth 6 cubits. A cubit is the length from, I believe, the tip of your finger to your elbow. A span would be from your thumb to your pinky finger. So a cubit would vary, but it'd be about that length. So 60 of these, so it's longer than a foot, more than 60 feet, 70 feet, whatever. It was tall. Image of gold, 60 cubits, and its breadth was 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent together the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the province to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the province gathered for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. No, I did not read the same line twice. This is how Daniel is written. And they stood before the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And the herald proclaimed aloud, you are commanded, O peoples, nations, languages, that when you hear the sounds, here's another list for you, but that when you hear the sounds of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into the burning fiery furnace, or the fiery furnace, if you prefer. Therefore, as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, all the peoples and the nations and the languages fell down and worshiped the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So already this is going to be a fun story to read to your kids, because they're going to, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the bagpipe, there were bagpipes back then. Oh, the Scottish people were around. I think these words, I mean, bagpipe is probably similar to what it is. I'm sure the Scots were not the first to use an instrument like that. But anyway, so you've got this repetition of lists a few times. We already talked about that. Verse 8. So Nebuchadnezzar sets up this golden image. You all have to worship it. You all have to participate in the pagan thing. So whereas Daniel in the lion's den, Daniel is forbidden from praying to his God. In Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the fiery furnace, they are commanded to do something sinful. So whereas Daniel is forbidden from doing something righteous, these three are commanded to do something sinful. Obviously, you bow to no other God. There is only one God. All right, verse 8. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed to the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. I do wonder if they use this entire phrase, or if this is kind of just a way of telling the story where they specifically listed off all of the musical instruments every time they brought up the command. I'd like to think that they did. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in a furious rage, commanded, so Darius was unhappy that he had to put Daniel into the lion's den. Nebuchadnezzar is more than happy to kill these people. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in a furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before Nebuchadnezzar. before the king, Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego?" I also love that they don't switch the names around. It's always in that order, like Larry, Moe, and Curly or whatever. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or Shemp, if you prefer, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up. Now, if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made. Well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into the fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? This is a leading question. If you're teaching a Sunday school class to kids, who can deliver them out of, it's like Nebuchadnezzar just setting it up for them. What kind of God could possibly deliver you from the fiery furnace? I really want to think that it's trademarked, the list of instruments and the image that I have set up, that he has to say the whole name, contractually obligated. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that's also, you can't separate those. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If it be so, our God we serve is able to deliver us from the fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." All right, this is extremely important because a lot of times you've got people who think about their Christian faith, or they think about they think about harm coming to them. Sometimes as missionaries, let's say you're going to a hostile country or a hostile tribe or something like that, God probably hasn't come to you in a dream and said, "I will protect you from their spears and their arrows and stuff like that." It has happened. It has happened that people have been protected in miraculous ways. But in this instance, this is one of these instances that we see in the Bible that God did not come to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and tell them in advance, "Go confidently into the fiery furnace, for I will protect you from any harm." He does do that in other times. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were left to trust God. So they knew that this situation was going to be bad, and they knew that there were two possible outcomes. Either God would protect them in the furnace, or God would protect them by bringing them into heaven. They didn't know which one it was going to be. And this is important, I feel. Well, for me, this is really important because a lot of times, who knows, maybe you'll be put in a situation one day where your faith is going to be tested, and you don't have the confidence of knowing, well, I know God's going to let me walk out of here unscathed. And these people didn't know either. This is one of the most famous stories of God protecting people from obvious harm, and they didn't know in advance whether or not God was going to do this thing. Whereas something like Elijah calling down fire in front of the prophets of Baal, I'm pretty sure he knew in advance that God was going to do that thing. So he knew, God communicated to him some way that he was going to do some miracle. In this instance, these people, they did not receive communication that God was going to do some miracle. This is one of the reasons why I don't have healing services and snake, what are the snake, not charming, what was that, snake handling services and stuff like that. Because God has never once said to me, "By the way, pastor, everybody on whom you lay your hands will be physically healed of all of their ailments. And by the way, you are free to test God by getting bitten by snakes, and the venom will never affect you." So God never communicated that to me. So if there's a bunch of snakes, I might just die. Or I might not. I don't know yet. We'll find out. But I'm not going to put God to the test by specifically putting myself in that situation. Now, in the case of Elijah, he's not putting God to the test with the fire down from heaven. He knows God is going to call down fire from heaven. In fact, it's probably God's idea in the first place. In the case of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they take the humble approach of saying, "Well, you know what? God didn't reveal to me how this is going to work out, but I'll tell you what, it's going to work out. No matter what, we're going to trust in God." Another example, if we were doing the one-year lectionary today, they have the binding of Isaac. So Abraham brings Isaac up onto the mountain. He believes that he's actually going to kill Isaac. And then later on, and I think the book of Hebrews, or Galatians, I don't remember. I think it's Galatians or something like that. I think Paul writes about Abraham, and he says, Abraham thought he was actually going to kill Isaac, but he didn't. I don't want to say he didn't worry, but he wasn't afraid because he knew that even if he killed Isaac, God would bring him back. So he knew that even if he lost his son, God would return his son because God had promised that this son would be the son of promise. So Abraham didn't know how the binding of Isaac was going to turn out. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego didn't know how the fiery furnace was going to turn out. They just knew that whatever happened, God was in control. And so this is the faith that we can have, unless you're getting messages directly from God, which could happen, but probably don't. If you're put in a situation where you've got sickness or persecution or something like that, it is perfectly acceptable to say, you know what, I don't know how this situation is going to pan out. God knows. Well, I'm excited to see how he does it. They were probably not positively excited. This was probably terrifying for them, but they said they trusted in God. And I've got a kid's book, like a cartoon version of the Bible stories and stuff that I read to my kids every night. And I love in this story that they included this line that they say that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego says, God might not protect us from the fire. He could do it. He might not, but to his glory either way. So that's the kind of confidence that we can have. We don't have to wait until God tells us exactly how things are going to happen. We can actually trust in him. Okay. Verse 19. Okay, so Nebuchadnezzar is such a character. What do you think his response is when they say, yeah, you know what, you could throw us in the furnace. God might protect us, might not, who knows? Why don't you go ahead and do it, see what happens. Verse 19, then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury and the expression on his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the fiery furnace. Then these men, bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, and their other garments, they were thrown into the fiery furnace. Because the king's order was urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And all these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. Dun, dun, dun. Find out what happens next week. No, so the fiery passion of Nebuchadnezzar, he doesn't care who he kills to kill these people. He picks some of his best men and lets his best men get incinerated just so he can kill these 3 people who made him so angry. This is a guy who's got a temper. Verse 24, then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire? And they answered and said to the king, true, O king. He answered and said, but I see 4 men unbound and walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. Wonder what's going on there. Now, you may recall from Daniel in the lion's den how Daniel was saved. Now, Daniel did not say, and God gave me the power to tame the lions. And God protected me, and I ran circles around the lions, and I was able to Spider-Man climb my way under the ceiling, and they couldn't touch me. How specifically was Daniel saved from the lions? You remember? God shut the lion's mouth. Specifically, he sent his angel. So not just an angel. He sent his angel. Now, if you'll recall, the angel of the Lord, refers to somebody who is sometimes bowed down to and worshiped as God, is regarded as the Lord himself. We call this the pre-incarnate Christ, or a theophany. So Jesus was incarnate and born in Bethlehem. But before that, the second person of the Trinity, the Son of God, already existed. And he interacted with people in the Old Testament kind of a lot, actually. Once you start looking for it, you see him everywhere. So a son of the gods. So remember, Nebuchadnezzar thinks there's a bunch of gods. If he knew what he was saying, he would have said, he looks like the Son of God. The Son of God is standing in the fire and protecting Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The angel of the Lord, messenger means angel, the angel of the Lord shut the mouths of the lions. So Jesus is back here in the Old Testament doing miracles. Before he's born and crucified, he's still active in protecting God's people here. So verse 20. So yeah, Nebuchadnezzar there's really no excuse for saying, well, the fire wasn't hot enough, Or maybe they hid somewhere in the furnace where they were protected from the flames. Like the people who brought, the three people who brought, or the strong men who brought the three men to the fire, they died by being close to the furnace. There is no reason why Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego should have survived by any natural means. To make this more abundantly clear, then Nebuchadnezzar came near the door of the fiery furnace and declared, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God. Yep, you got it right this time. Come out and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire. And the satraps and the prefects and the governors and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not any power over the bodies of these men. The hair on their heads was not singed. Their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel, again, that word, and delivered his servants who trusted in him, and set aside the king's commands and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except for their own God. Therefore I make a decree. Any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb and their houses laid in ruins, for there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. And the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So you might have noticed a couple of similarities in those stories. I didn't see specifically that the other people got thrown in the fiery furnace. That would have been just like the Daniel in the lion's den thing. But still, it's a good ending. It's a good ending. Well, Nebuchadnezzar dies eventually. He has a bunch of dreams. He's humiliated, and he dies and is replaced by King Darius. So Daniel lives through more than a few kings here. But Nebuchadnezzar, if nothing else, is remembered for his fiery temple and his fiery temper and his fiery furnace. I'll read the beginning of Daniel chapter 4 as well, because this is kind of connected. King Nebuchadnezzar to all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell on the earth. So this is his message. Peace be multiplied to you. It has seemed good to me to show the signs and wonders that the Most High God has done for me. How great are his signs, how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion endures from generation to generation. Again, Darius says a similar thing after realizing that Daniel's God is indeed the one true God. I don't think necessarily that this means that Darius and Nebuchadnezzar were converted to the one true faith. I think at least best case scenario, Nebuchadnezzar is acknowledging he thinks that there are still multiple gods, but one God just happens to be better. Or Daniel's God is effective. Or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's God is an effective God, whereas these other gods are less reliable. There we go. So that's Daniel in the lion's den and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Those were Daniel's friends. There's other stories about them. There's stories like when there's a contest of I used to make my mom so mad with this one. There's a contest for who can gain the most muscle or whatever, basically. So I think it's Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or it's Daniel and two of the three. They're getting pampered, and they're saying, well, actually, we're not going to eat any meat or drink any wine like all of your royal guards and stuff do. We're just going to eat vegetables and drink water, and God's going to make us stronger than you. And I don't know who the king was at this point. Probably Nebuchadnezzar basically says, okay, I'll do that. I'll take your bet, and I'll feed you guys nothing but vegetables and water. And he feeds the guards meat and wine. And behold, Daniel and his friends were much more healthy, like way more healthy than the other ones. All right. So I brought up this story one time in the presence of my mom, and I said, see, this is proof that only by a miracle can vegetables make you strong. Otherwise, it is only by God's gracious omnipotence that vegetables can do any good for you, because the wisdom of the Bible says that meat and wine are what make a man strong. And broccoli, yeah, only broccoli in a miracle, but not broccoli on itself. So yeah, she wasn't actually mad, but she was irritated. She says, that's not the point of the story. I said, I know, but that's the point that I'm going to take away, because I wanted to have meat for dinner.